Let's open up the Vintage Collection 3.75-inch figure of the Mandalorian Mines of Mandalore version, VC312.
Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it.
Hello there, thanks for visiting Villa Varykino. Today I'm going to be opening up the newest version of the Mandalorian himself from the Vintage Collection line. This one is the Mines of Mandalore version, VC312. I have to start off by saying that I'm quite excited to be opening this figure because this is in fact the very first Mandalorian figure of Din Djarin himself that I will be opening. That may sound a little bit strange, but when the Mandalorian series first aired and the figures started hitting the store shelves, I was still in my I'm going to keep my action figures carded phase. So that phase has since ended, so I'm excited to actually finally jump in and open up this figure. I do own several other versions of the Mandalorian himself. Of course, I'm sure most of us do own at least one other version, but I'm very excited to finally get one out and check out all of his details there. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, I'll take this figure off the backing card. We can check out all of the details of this specific version, check out those accessories. But first, let's go over the packaging and a quick comparison with some of those other carded figures. For this Vintage Collection carded figure, of course, the packaging style is in reference to the iconic original trilogy era figures from Kenner, where we have the pretty rectangular black backing card with a single chrome racetrack. Of course, A New Hope figures have the double chrome racetrack, and instead of the Star Wars movie logos, we have the series logo here, the Mandalorian. Just as a little bit of a personal aside, I think this is kind of fun that we have this very standardized packaging style. Makes it great if you like to put your mint on card figures in third-party cases, but I do feel a little bit of nostalgia will be lost over the years. We don't have a specific Mandalorian style packaging like we did with, say, the Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith. Each of them had very distinct packaging styles for the action figures attached to those movies. Now, in 10 years' time, 20 years' time down the track, when we look back at action figures from The Mandalorian, from Andor, Ahsoka, all of the packaging looks the same. So the era and series that these figures matched with is kind of going to be a little bit lost over time. I know that is an issue for way down the line, but something that I really am fond of is looking back at the packaging for the toys that I bought in my very early years of Star Wars collecting. This is fun for fans that remember the Kenner era and do like the fact that it is very standardized and all matches up, but it is going to be something that I think we might be wishing we had a few other options for. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love the Vintage Collection line, but it's kind of interesting that we don't have these same exact figures available in Mandalorian branded packaging. I think that would have been really fun to have something like with Din Djarin's helmet, like we had in those Clone Wars era with the Clone Trooper shaped helmet backing cards. I think that that's going to be something we perhaps will miss, 40 years down the line when we're thinking back of our collecting journey. But nevertheless, of course, I do love the Vintage Collection style here. It's kind of fun seeing it in modern figure form. So we have that Mandalorian series logo there in red, and for Din Djarin himself, the Mandalorian, we have an orange accent color. Kind of interesting because he doesn't really wear a lot of orange, but I know a lot of thought goes into sort of contrasting colors. It doesn't need to match up to what they actually wear. We've got a nice preview picture here of Din Djarin himself. We can see the cockpit here of his N1 starfighter down the bottom. Of course, this is when he is landing on Mandalore to explore the mines of Mandalore, of course. We can see the figure packaged nicely here. That orange color does contrast, so he stands out nicely here. We can see that we have 3 accessories. We have the figure, we have a vibro knife little stick here, we have the dark saber, we have Din Djarin's blaster pistol, and looking down the side, we have a soft goods cloak and his jetpack. Now, those are some of the points where I'm really keen to see those out. Soft goods look very different when you get them off the packaging, and we just can't see there in the back. Earlier versions of Din Djarin have plastic capes, and of course, way back when, he doesn't have a jetpack, and of course, he doesn't have the darksaber either. So this will be different to some of the other versions that I have. I know it's going to be very similar to some other versions of this figure as well, so it's going to be fun to really go through all of those details there. But overall, if you like to keep your figures mint on card, this one looks nice. nice. The image here is just perhaps a little bit dark, but it is of course true to the lighting of this particular scene, so it doesn't bother me. We've got the Kenner logo here, the warning symbol up the top here, and of course the 4+ there in the top left. Now on the back, we have this slightly newer backing design here, where we have a picture of the front of the backing card with a posed image of the action figure placed in front of it. We have that accent color that is used behind the figure in a big swish here. So I have another vintage collection figure card here. This is for the Mandalorian figure, VC181, and we can see that we had something that felt a little bit more aligned with a very retro style here, with that chrome racetrack Star Wars logo and the little colored boxes of other figures, very much reminiscent of those vintage collection card backs from the 70s and 80s. This one feels a bit more modern. It's kind of fun that we get a posed picture here of the figure with all the accessories. We get a little bit of a preview of the cape there, but personally I kind of like this version better. Some figures have been reissued, so we can have the same exact figure on 2 different backing cards, so you get a little bit of a choice in the matter, especially if it is a true reissue with the same number. But nevertheless, this one's bright, this one's colorful. Perhaps this one meshes more with the toy department shelf. This one feels a little bit more targeted towards collectors, where you can see some of the other characters and figures from the particular assortment that it was released in. This one includes a bio of the character. It has Din Djarin, once a lone bounty hunter, has reunited with Grogu as the New Republic struggles to lead the galaxy away from its dark history. So very sort of vague, not too spoilery, but fun if you are a new fan to the Star Wars universe of storytelling. Just a little bit of a blurb for anyone that perhaps doesn't know who the Mandalorian is. But overall, I like this backing card style better, but of course I am going to be opening this one up. So let's quickly grab a couple of other figures and compare them a little bit closer up, because I really want to see how this one looks different. Let's take a quick look at this new vintage collection Minds of Mandalore figure with a couple of other carded examples that I have on hand. For a quick reference, this is Minds of Mandalore VC312, VC181, VC166, and the deluxe VC211 with the snow weathering. These 3 have plastic capes. This one has a soft goods cape. Soft goods capes tend to be tucked behind, so it can be a little bit harder to see how they're going to be once you take the figure out. I'm very keen to see what that one looks like. And of course, the Mandalorian's armor does change a lot over the series. So of course, Hasbro has released different versions with all of those different tweaks, particularly the thigh armor. Even though we see a lot of the Beskar version, his thigh armor does change, and some of those lower leg pieces as well. We have quite a few differences in accessories as well. These 2 have jetpacks worn behind the figure. These 2 do not. He doesn't have a jetpack in those early episodes, and he doesn't use it in every episode, so some versions of the figures don't come with it. This one comes with one weapon, a blaster pistol. Then he has an armband rifle and blaster pistol for these 2 figures. Over here, he has a darksaber, vibro blade, vibro knife, and his blaster pistol. There is a version that comes with the Beskar spear. That one is probably the closest to this version here. It is packaged with the N1 Starfighter vehicle. Sadly, that vehicle is very hard to come by here in New Zealand, so it is not in my collection. So I was quite happy, for me personally, that this figure is so close to that one, because I don't own it. Not everyone has the budget or the access to those larger collectible pieces, so I do appreciate, for some people it is perhaps slightly annoying that this is perhaps a very close, if not exact, double up of that figure, but for those of us that don't have it, I'm glad that I have another way of accessing it. I like to think of it as like the HasLab carded figures being available on slightly different backing cards for collectors who cannot afford that particular price point. So I really like all of these different versions. It's fun to see them all lined up, and they do look very different. But of course, there is so much cool stuff about this figure. I'm really liking the details, and I really want to check out the darksaber, how he's going to hold that, and his soft goods cloak. I'm really keen to open him up, so let's get stuck into it. Now I have the Mandalorian figure and those 3 small accessories out of the packaging so we can take a closer look. And first things first, when I take them out of that plastic bubble, we can see the soft goods properly. They were kind of tucked in behind the figure, so now we can see it properly. And we've got this really interesting weathered edging to it with all of these holes, the tattered edge. There's a lot to look over here. So I get the feeling this jetpack it didn't feel very securely on, so I think I'm just going to remove that so I can take a closer look at the soft goods without worrying about knocking that off, because I know he's not really wearing it fully across his back. If he's got his jetpack on, it doesn't go through the cape, but I feel like I just want to have a better look at this accessory, then I'll put the jetpack on. So we can see the amount of holes here that have been cut into the edge, and then we've got this big sort of central cut here and this very sort of weathered edge. I think this is really fun. Definitely adds a bit more sort of detail to it. I like the texture of the cape. It's actually quite thin fabric. Some capes and soft goods over the years have been sort of a bit chunkier fabric. I like the scale, and I do appreciate how well it has been attached under his helmet here. We've got some seaming here across the shoulder and around the neck, so it's kind of pulled tightly. Doesn't look like it's pushing the helmet up too much, and we've got a little bit of seaming here, sort of so that it's gathering off to the side. So overall, pretty nice. We've just got those few sort of tuck seams there just to give it a bit of shape. Overall, it is pretty flat. If we look at it like the bottom there, it's not very wide, but this is not supposed to be like Vader's cape. It's not very full. And of course, if it was very big, it would be very awkward with the jetpack. So pulling it up, we can kind of see some of that stitching detail from the inside there. If you are a customizer, you should be able to easily pop off the head or slash helmet and remove this. It does feel quite tightly attached there. It's not really designed to be slipped on and off over the helmet. Because this fabric isn't edged in a sort of a stitched manner, it is just a raw cut. You could possibly, I feel like this has a bit of stretch. It is a stretch fabric. I can gently tug on it. You can probably pull it off the helmet without popping the helmet off, but I'm not going to stress test the stitching or the fabric because it's not edged. We can damage it by sort of pulling on it too much. Like if you have a raw edge t-shirt, you're eventually going to sort of ruin those edges, but we can see the stitching there on the underside. We can see that sort of seaming there, giving it a bit of shape, running all the way down there. I like the dark color. I like the thin feel of it. It's actually nice and soft, which is kind of fun. I know I'm not going to be handling this soft goods cape very often, but it just helps it sort of drape fairly nicely there. With the cape lifted up out of the way, we can see that unusual pig hole here for the jetpack. It is not in the center like we usually find on other jetpack wearing figures. It's an unusual shape and off to the left here. Looking really closely, there's also a very small little pig hole here in that bandolier strap across the back. That lines up with a very small hole here in the back as well. I assume, because I haven't opened up other Mandalorian figures, that this is the attachment point for the armband rifle worn across his back. I'm assuming Hasbro is reusing these pieces here because we don't have anything else small to attach, and this piece just has that one large pig hole there. We can also see that attachment point is off center for the jetpack itself as well. It's kind of interesting that this is so hollow. I'm used to some of the recent Boba Fett jetpacks that have kind of a back to them. Kind of interesting to see this one is completely hollow. Maybe that just helps with the weight with this soft goods cape in the side there. Everything's painted nicely here on the back, despite the fact it's going to be covered by the cloak. I do still like attention to detail, even if I know it's going to be ultimately covered with accessories. And it is a little bit funny because, of course, this hole here in the back doesn't always perfectly line up with that bandolier strap hole because, of course, the bandolier is attached to the belt and I can move the chest around. So if you want to attach an accessory to his back, you're going to have to sort of find that perfect alignment with the positioning, sort of play around with the placement of the bandolier. But yeah, so I guess if you've got an armband rifle from a different figure, it still looks like you can attach it to this one, which I guess is good for play features in mind or just creating some interesting scene posing and photography there. Overall, I'm very happy with that cape. We do still be able to turn that head around there. Sometimes these really do restrict the way that we can move the head. Because the Mandalorian, generally speaking, doesn't remove his helmet, we do sort of get a lot more expression with the direction and sort of tilt of his helmet. So I feel like being able to pose his helmet in the way that you particularly feel like for the scene is important. Is he looking down at Grogu? Is he looking over to the side at an enemy? I like the fact that I can still move this around and get some sort of inquisitive expressions here. I say expressions. The position of his helmet. We're reading a lot into his helmet these days, of course. But yeah, I like these soft goods capes. Now I'm really curious to open up some of those ones with plastic capes and see if I prefer this one. I just really like soft goods. I know in my early collecting days, it always felt quite deluxe to have a fabric on an action figure compared to, you know, so many that don't. Okay, so let's check out some of the other details here. As I saw across the back, the sort of bandolier strap is attached at the belt, and it doesn't seem to be attached across the shoulder. I can sort of move that. There we go. I can move that up and over to the shoulder a little bit. So we've got a little bit more of a gap here for the shoulder armor. I do feel sorry for some of the Hasbro sculptors, some of the tricky complexities of Star Wars armor and trying to make sure that we still get a good range of movement from action figures. So we've got an armor piece here. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Clone Trooper armor with how high it goes up here. I'm hoping that it just, oh, we're gonna hit it here a little bit of a wiggle, and I can get it to just fit under that shoulder piece there so I can lift his arm up all the way. I thought that might stop. You can see it's pretty tight, but I can get that arm up all the way. This is a metallic paint finish. It's not vac metallized. It's pretty nice and shiny. So I feel like this might be a little bit more durable for, you know, really rubbing in that particular area. And this one, of course, has that iconic mudhorn signet there as well. Nice fine detail there. The painting is pretty good. Let's see how well, oh, we're going to have to sort of wiggle this one around a little bit. I'm hitting. Oh, there we go. It's kind of hitting. It's a little bit more of a squeeze to get that one in there. I feel like they're not as rubbery as some shoulder armor pieces, but that one definitely did feel like that was really pushing in there to get that one up, but I can get that one up all the way. Generally speaking, I'm probably not going to be doing those sort of exaggerated movements, but it's always fun to see how well this one's going to move around. This particular figure, if I look really closely, there's just like a tiny bit of a gap where this particular shoulder piece has been attached to the arm. I can kind of see a plastic peg right in here. Very, very small, but I can kind of see the gap that I don't get on this piece. Very subtle, minor sort of detail. I might be able to press that in with a little bit of wriggling. It might just be glued in place, and that's going to be just one very specific quirk about my specific figure. This one is new in New Zealand. I was only able to spot the one, so again, I didn't see multiples, and otherwise I might have noticed this particular aspect of this particular figure, and I might have chosen another one. Personally, for me, I'm always looking at the visors of helmeted characters. There's something about that black visor, if it's a little bit off or a little bit mispainted, it really throws me off. And because we have such this lovely sort of glossy metallic finish, any paint flaws on the chest area and the dome part of the helmet are really going to draw my eye. So generally, small little details I'm willing to put up with, so long as these shiny, eye-catching areas are well painted and well defined, and I'm really liking the detail. We've got some small silver painted details here on his bandolier. There is just so much detail of the Mandalorian's armor. There's so much to go over. We've got fantastic silver here for his gauntlet, yellow glove details with that sort of blue triangle there, again on this glove as well. The silver paint on his gauntlets feels subtly different to the silver paint used for the other pieces, and I can't quite put my finger on why it feels a little bit different. I don't know if it's just because of the smooth areas here, and this is sort of finer detail. Something about it's just kind of drawing my eye and makes it feel like it's just different. It's probably exactly the same, and I'm just the way that light is catching these sort of smoother surfaces gives them a little bit more of like a chromey finish, and this looks more like the metallic paint I'm used to seeing on action figures. Kind of, this is what this feels like to me. We've got some muted colors here on the sort of the ab fabrics, the pieces over the hips here. We've got the sort of details here on the belt with those red accent pieces there. We've got a holster for his blaster pistol, which has a hollow bottom to it. Let's see, very stiff. That doesn't feel rubbery at all. Okay, that's going to be interesting. Sometimes with these, they're kind of squishy, so you can kind of get the small accessory in and out. That one feels very stiff. And I can see we've got those sort of swivel points there at the top of the hip. You can kind of see this one here. That kind of lines up nicely with the top of his thigh armor. This one's very stiff. I'm actually just turning mostly the whole leg. Just going to see if I can get it from this side. Again, he just wants to pivot his whole leg. That one's a stiff joint. Okay, let's see if I can do it on this one. Oh, it's very stiff. I can see that line there. So we do have those articulation points, but he just wants to move freely at the hips. So let's go and test out his articulation here. I want to see how well we can get his leg up. I want to, there we go. Okay, now I can tip his leg facing the right way. I get the feeling, okay, these are a little bit rubbery here, and they're kind of impacting on his movement a little bit. We can swivel. That's definitely moving a little bit freer now that I've got the sort of leg up to the high point. This one, I'm going to have to play around with the positioning of the top of the thighs, because it kind of doesn't want to move fully straight up. I feel like the legs are a bit twisted on this figure. They're a bit awkward, to be honest. Kind of wants to swivel around a lot, and I'm not really getting, there's a bit of resistance here. The legs feel like they're more articulated outwards with the way that the articulation sort of angles here. You can see that articulation point wants to kind of sit under this thigh section rather than sort of being straight front and back, so we get that sort of forward plane of movement. They're kind of more angled out to the sides, so we're kind of getting more of a kicking motion out in sort of this angle. My one's very tight. I generally don't do a lot of sort of high kicks with my figures. I know that articulation is important to a lot of collectors. Personally, my eye is more drawn to the detail. And we've got more of this fabulous metallic Beskar finish armor here on his thighs. He goes through a few different versions. It's one of the pieces that I really notice different on the different versions of the Mandalorian. And we've also got this kind of muted blue color here for some of the pieces, like on his hips, his knees. We've got brown details here on the boots. We've got a little bit of red here, and that sort of ammo strap around the top of his belt. We've got some lovely silver detail there as well. I can't tell if we've got just a little bit of weathering on this one. This looks a little darker. I can see here in the corner, we've got some brilliant silver, and then it goes darker here. So I feel like we've got sort of a wash on this particular thigh piece compared to this one. We've got like a little bit of tiny dark weathering in the corners, in the recessed pieces here. This one has an interesting wash on it. I quite like that. It gives it kind of a bit more of a weathered in-world sort of tone to it rather than a stark silver. We've got some more silver details here on the belt, a silver buckle there, and again more details on the belt in the back. So much going on with his outfit. We can see most of the pants pretty straight and plain there at the back. We've got a little bit of that sort of boot detail coming around here at the back. The Mandalorian's outfit, generally speaking, is well covered by his cape that sort of hides everything, so we're not really going to see much of that anyway. So I took the jetpack off. Now, to be honest, it kind of almost looks like a 3D printed piece. It's very minimal, and we don't have any sort of painted detail, but that is how it is on the show. It is sort of very silver to match his Beskar armor. I don't recall there being any sort of extra additional painted details. It does look like these sort of engine pieces, the sort of thrusters here down the side are separate pieces. We can see those seam lines here. So we've got a little bit of interesting detail going on there. And of course, it's hollow with that interesting shaped pig there. So not too much going on with this, certainly less detailed than a Boba Fett jetpack. Now, this strap here is going to affect our ability to get this pig really tight and close, I think. It feels like that might just get in the way a little bit. And I'm curious to see how well, that's very tight. As in, I'm having trouble putting it in actually. I like it when these things go on and fit on very snugly. This one, it feels like I can sort of knock it off a little bit, which is a little bit unfortunate because we've got this sort of soft goods cape that we kind of want to sort of slide in underneath it. So I feel like that's kind of going to be providing a little bit of resistance. I do appreciate the fact that it is attached off to the side. I was really worried about how the soft goods was going to work, whether it was all going to be pushed over to his shoulder. But it looks kind of cool. It definitely gives a swish because the jetpack is forcing the cloak to go over this side. I guess you could pull it round and do it on the other side, but the stitching on this side very much favors his right arm. So it's going to hang this way. Checking out the rest of the articulation, he's got that sort of mid-torso swivel point. Of course, this bandolier strap is going to restrict it a little bit, but I'm actually quite impressed with how well I can sort of move it without that impacting too much. Sort of glides over it there. And of course, he's going to have the very typical arm articulation so that we can hold some things like the Darksaber. Very stiff on this arm. There we go. Of course, we can move his hands. He's got a tight sort of C grip here for his left hand. His right hand, you can see quite well because of those yellow accents on his gloves. He's got an extended trigger finger for his blaster pistol there. Let's check out his knees. Hopefully this is not going to look too clunky. Okay, because his knee armor is actually attached on below the articulation point there. I thought maybe it might be sculpted here on the thigh so it would hang down over, but the dark color of his sort of flight suit here isn't too bad. We can see it. Oh, there goes the jetpack. We can see the articulation there on the knees. I do like it when sort of knee armor does cover that from the front. I don't mind articulation showing in the back. But yeah, the dark color means that it hides in there fairly well. It does look a little bit odd in that position, so we'll straighten him up. And of course, oh, we've got some nice movement there at the ankles as well. So I get the feeling he's going to be one that's going to be really fun to play around with some poses because he uses movement and body position to sort of convey so much expression. There is a very specific way that the Mandalorian moves and holds himself on screen. So I feel like we can get some really interesting sort of personality coming through in this very small action figure form. Let's just quickly check out that other arm. Sometimes they can be a little bit stiff the first time you get them out, and then you sort of start moving everything around. Very cool there. I kind of like the way he looks with the cloak without the jetpack on. It's kind of fun. Very dramatic there with it sort of flowing on both sides. Okay, let's check out his accessories. We did the jetpack. I'll leave that one to the side because I'm going to knock it off. I just know it. Okay, we're going to start with the smallest and perhaps the least interesting here. We have the tiny little gray vibro knife here. It's just a single color, just gray plastic, very small, but we've got some interesting fine detail there. I'm just going to try and pop this one in his hand. Now I'm looking around to see if there's a spot on his armor anywhere to put it. I don't see. I might just be a little bit poor eyesighted here to see if there is a, oh, that actually went into his hand not too hard at all. I was a little bit worried because it has a little bit of a bend to it. Of course, it is very small and thin. I was a little bit worried I was going to, have to really wrestle that into his hand, but that went in quite easily. And I've probably got it pointing the wrong way, but there we go. He's got it in his hand. He holds that nice and well. Okay, so as I said very distractedly, I don't see a spot on this figure to sheath it. It doesn't have like an attachment point, so it's not going to sort of go on his belt or anything like that. Some characters are like, sort of have a knife sheathed like Hunter on their sort of forearm or in their boots. I don't see an attachment point, so that's going to be one very small accessory I'm going to try not to lose. Okay, I'm fascinated by this Darksaber. It's kind of bendy. That's kind of freaking me out. I'm worried that at least mine is straight. You can see it's not knife thin. We can see that there is a fairly broad edge to it. But I guess they don't want to give kids a tiny little stabbing toothpick or letter opener by making this sharp. We can bend it there, but mine was fairly straight. We've got a fairly just a straight black line on each side against sort of the white. It's a very complicated kind of effect. It's a lot more intricate than just a lightsaber blade. So I was kind of expecting maybe a bit of a jaggedy sort of edge to the black, maybe give it a little bit more of that sort of crackle or something like that. So it's a little bit straight, but I do like the hilt. There's a lot of good detail there on the hilt. It's generally pretty dark. I don't think there is any painting detail to this hilt. It's just black, but I like the detail of it there. Very, very small. I just wish there was perhaps a little bit more, I don't know. I know lightsabers don't have that sort of jaggedy effect, but something about the dark saber has a slightly rawer feel to the blade. It doesn't look like a classic lightsaber, so just having a little bit of an edge to this other black painted line here. Again, that would probably be very hard to do on this sort of flexible piece of plastic. So I appreciate that we have a lit version. As far as I can tell, and I don't want to wreck my toy, this doesn't feel like it is a two-part piece like lightsabers where you can pop off the ignited section and have just the hilt. I'm looking really close. On this side, I feel like that is just one piece, and I'm not really in the mood to stress test that because it feels very, very thin there. I don't think that's actually wide enough for an attachment point there. So we don't have just a hilt version, it is an ignited version there. So let's go and put this in his hands. I feel like, yep, that just slid in. Very easy for him to hold. Okay, very cool. Okay, I kind of like the white edge a little bit more now that I have it in his hand. I think it definitely looks better when it's actually being held by a character. By itself, it looks perhaps almost a little cartoony, but now that I have it in the context of the figure, I've got Din Djarin looking at his darksaber there. I think it does look better on the sort of in context with the figure holding it. Looks cool. I like it. This is my only Din Djarin figure that actually comes with the darksaber. Rest in peace, darksaber. Maybe we will see you in a future episode. Who knows? And then, of course, we have his trusty blaster pistol. Very small, some good detail here, mostly silver with that small little wooden grip detail there at the end. It's very small. It has a completely enclosed trigger guard. It's just that sort of cutout circle. It's not open. And sometimes this can be very tricky to get the action figure finger to line up well. If they sort of just grip around the grip, it looks awkward. I'm a little bit worried about how well this one's going to go in. This is my first experience with this specific blaster style. So let's see how well I can get this to go in his hand. Okay, now let's see. Oh, wow. Okay. Woo! That went straight in. Oh, that's a relief. I was really worried about that. You can see his finger because he's got those fabulous accented yellow tips to his gloves. How well that just went in there. That's got to be one of the easiest sort of gun position holding figures that I have come across in my recent openings. That was such a relief. I was really worried because it looked like such a tight little spot to get his finger into. Nicely sculpted. Sometimes I feel like the hands on Hasbro action figures are just a generic hand and it's supposed to just hold whatever figure. I feel like some of them aren't very well matched up to the weapons that they get. That one feels very well matched up to his weapon. That looks really cool. Okay, so I know I'm just going to leave the vibro knife over there. It's, it's not the most interesting of the weapons. Just going to see how well he can hold the darksaber in his other hand. Okay, that went in well there. It's going to be a little bit wild. Just going to flip that round a little bit. Okay, and we'll see if we can get his jetpack on and we'll get everything all together and see what he looks like all dressed up. Okay, just going to very carefully sort of swish that cape underneath. The cape kind of wants to push that jetpack off because I'm trying to sort of fit a lot of that excess fabric there. So we've got a little bit of a extra, it just wants to fly off. Okay, we'll see how well I can get this on. I really want to see it all together. That's the fun part of getting your action figure out of the box. You get to see everything all together. Okay, a little bit bunched. Are you gonna just let me tuck that down? Okay, I kind of wish that peg hole was just a little bit more secure, but he is looking pretty cool. A lot of details. He's got a lot of articulation here. He's got a lot of sort of little tweaks that I can do to his posing. And I'm glad he kind of stands up reasonably well. Sometimes jetpacks and soft good capes can really throw off the balance of these smaller figures. I find the larger scale Black Series figures do tolerate balance a little bit better. They've just got a little bit more stability with that sort of added mass, particularly in the lower legs. But overall, he stands pretty well. I like the cape with all of those little holes, those jagged edges. Just feels a little bit more scaled appropriately to the figure. Sometimes it looks like somebody kind of cut some fabric and tied it around the neck of a figure if it has those very straight edges, particularly with something as fine as this detail here. I really like that. I really like the weathering on the silver pieces of his leg armor here. Just gives it a little bit more of a worn in-world effect. Just dims that sort of Beskar shine compared to his dome. We have got just a few tiny little sort of, I don't want to call them dents, just perhaps subtle paint imperfections, particularly here, just catching the light. But with metallic finishes, any subtle little variance in the plastic underneath is going to show very strongly. So generally speaking, it doesn't catch my eye except when I am looking very, very close up. It would be interesting to see if Hasbro ever experiments with giving us like sort of like a special edition version of Mandalorian in his Beskar armor with a vac metallized finish. I think that would be kind of a fun, like a collector's version. Of course, there is a lot of discussion about vac metallized Star Wars figures, you know, C3PO, TC14, all of those ones. It's been a while since we've had those kind of really cool sort of different metallic finishes. Just always kind of curious to see if we'll ever get that. I know Beskar isn't that sort of true chrome like we have on C3PO, but it'll be kind of like a fun little sort of special edition, even if Hasbro wants to charge us more. Just fun for the collectors that like those sort of a variant. They've done a few like those carbonized figures and things like that. Those were kind of fun, but again, that was more of a paint finish, not that vac metallized finish. But yes, shiny silver gets my attention. I think this is really fun. I'm so excited to finally have opened my very first Mandalorian figure, the Mines of Mandalore. I really like the details. I think the soft goods cape, despite the fact it's fighting a little bit with the jetpack, I know with a little bit of time and spending articulating him into some poses, I can really sort of get that cape into just the right position. He stands well. I like the fact I can still move his helmet. I was a little bit worried all of that fabric around underneath the helmet was going to stop me from moving the helmet very well. I can still get some cool expressions, as it were, from the position of the helmet. He holds that blaster really well. I was worried about that. Such a small blaster too. Fits that very well. And I like that he comes with a dark saber as well. My earlier versions don't include that. He doesn't have it in those versions there. Of course, if you want to add on the armband rifle, it looks like I might be able to attach it there in the back. I'll have to wait until I open up one of those other versions that does include his armband rifle and try that on at a later time. But then again, I'll probably not want to mix and match accessories. I'm a little bit anxious about that. I do like to keep all my accessories well matched to the figure that they originally came with. I know some people like to mix and match to create different scenes. I get a little bit anxious about that, so I'm probably going to keep those accessories with the figures that they came with. But overall, I had a lot of fun. He looks cool, doesn't he? Of course, if you're going to collect figures from the Mandalorian, you've got to have at least one version of the Mandalorian himself with all of his different accessories and weapons there. He looks fantastic. Oh, can't wait to start building up my Mandalorian scene. I gotta get all of the rest of them all open and on display. So that was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up another Star Wars vintage collection figure and had a lot of fun. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again very soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a vintage collection fan, I recently unboxed the 2024 version of the Luke X-Wing pilot figure. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole vintage collection playlist. This is the way.